Hey guys, what's good? Welcome back to JDB Selects. Man, I can't believe it. We're up to round 24 of the season already. It feels like just yesterday we were just getting started, and now we've only got 4 more rounds left until the finals. But speaking of the finals, if you are a Panthers, Broncos, Storm, Raiders, Warriors fan, there's lots to be excited about. There's also still a lot to play for some of those teams in the middle of the ladder. A lot can change in the next 4 weeks, and I cannot wait to see how it all plays out. But before we get stuck into my tips around 24, let's as always look back at how we did last week. So last week we tipped 6 out of 8 games. Full credit to the Sharks for downing a really below par South Sydney side. The scoreline doesn't really reflect how dominant the Sharks were, but South Sydney are always that side that you can never write off and always have a late comeback in them. And then finally, I'm still pretty peeved about this, but the Tigers should have beaten the Raiders. I'm sorry, but the Tigers were the better side. They were robbed by a few horrible forward pass calls. I really wanted that tip. I think not many people picked the Tigers. I feel like we've been hard done by if you did too. So anyway, we move on. 6 out of 8. We go again this week. Now, if you don't know by now, we are running a subscriber tipping comp. All the details to join are shown on screen, so get involved if you can. And speaking of the tipping comp, I don't think there are any changes to the order from last week. I think most people got a fairly similar amount of tips last week in that 6 to 7 range. So no big changes at the top. Abdullah and Jared 68 still dueling it out on 118 points. Good luck to you both this week, and good luck to everyone else, whether you're in the tipping comp or not, with your tips for this week. Let's get stuck into my personal tips for round 24. Alright, round 24 gets underway on Thursday night with the 11th placed Manly Sea Eagles taking on the 1st placed Penrith Panthers at 4 Pines Park in Sydney. Starting first with Manly, their chances of making the top 8 took a massive hit as they went down to the Sydney Roosters, 26 points to 16. Manly enjoyed all the early ball, but couldn't find their way across the line in the first half. It took Manly over an hour to get their first try through Schuster, who was nearly invisible in the first 40, but popped up and orchestrated most of Manly's points in the second. Sipley was unlucky to be sin-binned when the penalty count was 10-6 against the Roosters, and losing him alongside Matt Lodge and Brad Parker temporarily made it really hard for the Sea Eagles to push on, considering they were already missing Paseka and Aloye. Matt Lodge is now out for the remainder of the season, leaving Manly very light through the middle, and coming up against one of the strongest forward packs in the competition, it doesn't bode too well for the Sea Eagles. And as for Penrith, the Panthers put on an absolute rugby league clinic against the Melbourne Storm on Friday night, cruising to a 26 to 6 point win at the foot of the mountains. It was an arm wrestle to begin with the Storm even nabbing the first try of the night, but it ended up being their only try as the Panthers clicked into gear and went about their business as they always do. I know I touched on it last week, but the synergy and class of Nathan Cleary and Jerome Luai is truly something special, and when you add in the destructive forces of Fisher Harris, Yeo, Martin, Sorensen and Leota, they really might just be unstoppable. Isaac Tangor, Spencer Leniu and Tyrone Peachey are still a few weeks away. Jerome Luai was of course put on report for a high tackle on Nelson Asafa Solomona, but has been cleared to play after accepting a $3,000 fine. Looking at the two sides head to head, the Panthers have won 15 of the past 18 encounters. That includes 7 straight. The Sea Eagles also haven't beaten the Panthers at 4 Pines Park since 2017. Fairly easy one to tip on the Thursday night, but the margin will be the tricky part. I am going to take the Panthers here 13 plus. Manly are missing far too many of their first choice middles, and the Panthers are just getting better and better each week leading into the finals. Not much else to say here, but good luck with your margins. Now moving to the first of the 2 Friday fixtures, starting first with the 6th placed Cronulla Sharks taking on the 13th placed Gold Coast Titans at PointsBet Stadium in Sydney. Starting first with Cronulla, the Sharks managed to snap a 3-game losing streak with a 26 to 16 point win over the South Sydney Rabbitohs in Perth. It was all the Sharks for the first 30 minutes, flying out to a 26-0 lead thanks to a rejuvenated performance from Nico Hines, Braden Trindle and Connor Tracy. The Sharks did a great job at going around South's edges and were far more disciplined and measured, which gave them more time with ball in hand. If I had to be critical though, the Sharks do seem to love switching off before the final whistle. They almost opened the door for South Sydney with 10 minutes to go, and it wouldn't be the first time they've done that this season. They blew a similar lead to the Warriors earlier in the season, and that's something that they cannot afford to do against tough oppositions because they will make you pay. And in terms of injuries, Ronaldo Mulitalo is back in action this week. And as for the Gold Coast, the Titans fought valiantly against the Warriors but couldn't pull off an unlikely victory, getting beaten 28 points to 18. The Titans started the game with a higher level of intensity, and even after Mo Fotuaika was red carded in the 16th minute, they managed to maintain it for the entire 80 minutes. Even before the send-off, it was always going to be an uphill battle for the Gold Coast, who were without their captain Tino and AJ Brimson, who was ruled out pre-game, but boy did they give it a nudge. The Titans managed to maintain a 90% completion rate for most of the match, and the omission of Brimson meant Jaden Campbell took his place and was easily the Titans' biggest threat, with 1 try, 258 running meters, 1 try assist, and 6 tackle breaks. Tino makes his return from suspension this week, and AJ Brimson will be rested again, while obviously Mo Fotuaika has been suspended for 1 game following his hit on Chance Nickel-Klukstad. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Sharks have won 8 straight against the Titans, and they've only lost to the Titans once in Sydney since 2015. So because of that, I am going to take the Sharks here, but I am going to go Sharks 1-12. Cronulla have proven in the past that they love to beat up bottom 8 sides, and they may finally have got their mojo back last week. But man, the Titans, you got to credit them for what they did with 12 men against the Warriors. So I'm going to give the Titans the benefit of the doubt and go Sharks 1-12. And the final game on Friday has the 2nd placed Brisbane Broncos hosting the 9th placed Parramatta Eels at the Gabba in Brisbane. Starting first with the Broncos, they got the better of the Cowboys in the latest Queensland Derby, 30 points to 14. It was almost the Broncos' best and worst performance of the season all rolled into one, with the Broncos creating plenty of chances but came up with far too many errors and blew multiple certain tries. Despite only completing at 67% and only seeing 47% of possession, the Broncos were defensively sound and were able to shut down the likes of Drinkwater and Dearden and posed enough strike power even without Adam Reynolds to pour on points. And speaking of Reynolds, Reynolds is back on deck this week, as is Kobe Hetherington, but Jesse Arthurs won't be available as he was unable to finish the game against the Cowboys. And as for Parramatta, the Eels managed to survive a late scare from the Dragons on Sunday afternoon, coming home strong to win 26 points to 20. Parramatta got on the board early before being tortured on their left edge by Zach Lomax and Michaeli Ravalawa. The Eels were given a lifeline when a 50-50 call from Clint Gutherson's tackle or strip on Jacob Little denied the Dragons and swung momentum completely back in Parramatta's favour. I thought Dylan Brown was solid in his return from suspension, running for over 100 metres and coming up with some really good plays defensively, but the standout was for sure Bryce Cartwright, who keeps turning back the clock. But they tried double, over 150 running meters and 8 tackle breaks. The Eels, they still have 1 more week to go before Micah Sivo and RCG return, so they will still be a wee bit light in some areas. Looking at the two sides head to head, the Eels, they have won 6 of the past 8 games against the Broncos. That includes 3 straight in Brisbane. This will be the Eels' first trip to the Gabba, while the Broncos are undefeated there, winning both games at the ground this season. Ooh, should be a good game this one. Both sides have proven they can score a lot of points in a hurry, but I am going to back the Broncos here 13+. There's obviously maybe a few, I wouldn't say key players, but obviously a few players missing for both sides. And obviously the stats do favour Parramatta, but I mean, come on. I think the Broncos are the better form side, and they have the edge over the Eels up front by a mile. So yeah, Broncos 13+. Alright, now moving to the first of 3 fixtures on Saturday, starting first with the 8th placed South Sydney Rabbitohs, taking on the 16th placed St George Illawarra Dragons at Barlow Park in Cairns. Starting first with South Sydney, the Rabbitohs failed to throw a punch against the Cronulla Sharks for nearly 60 minutes before leaving their run too late and falling short 26 points to 16. Souths couldn't match the effort of the Sharks and were consistently beaten with speed out on their edges. The Bunnies' attack looked clunky and disjointed, with Cody Walker only having 1 run in the first 40 minutes. The Rabbitohs are that kind of side though that are never out of it, and they showed just that in the final 10 minutes, but even then their ball handling and composure evaded them. Jai Arrow has been named to play despite suffering severe back spasms last week, while Big Tom Burgess has been suspended for 3 weeks for a fairly innocuous high shot. And as for St George, the Dragons almost managed to upset the Parramatta Eels, falling short 26 points to 20. The Dragons took it to the Eels after weathering the early storm and showed they had the ability to score points, with Lomax continuing his resurgence of form and Michaeli Ravalawa having an absolute day out, scoring all 4 of the Dragons' tries. We just touched on it before, but the big turning point in that match was the contentious decision to call a clear strip from Clint Gutherson on Jacob Little a loose carry, which would have seen the Dragons further extend their lead, but instead momentum swung in the Parramatta's favour and the Saints couldn't hold their nerve. And unfortunately for St George, their injury woes continue with Francis Molo ruled out with an HIA, but Moses Sully has been named to start. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, South Sydney have a great record over the Dragons. They've won 16 of the past 20 games, although the Dragons managed to down an understrength Rabbitohs side earlier this season. This will be South Sydney's 7th game at Barlow Park, and they have lost 3 of their last 4 there. Well, this will be the Dragons' debut at the venue. Oh man, it shouldn't be a hard one to tip, but I feel like it might be. But I'm still going to take the Rabbits 13 plus. I think obviously they're very hot and cold, but it really is now or never for them if they want to cement their place in the top 8. And I think they'll also be out for revenge after their loss to the Dragons earlier this season. Both sides are missing some key middles, so I kind of feel like that almost cancels it out. So you've got to go for, backline strike. And South Sydney should have far too much, or a lot more, than the Dragons. So risky one, but South 13 plus. Moving now to the second game on Saturday, we have the last placed West Tigers taking on the third placed NZ Warriors over here at FMG Stadium in Hamilton. Starting first with the Tigers could have, would have, and should have won the game against the Raiders to close out round 23, coming up just short, 22 points to 18. The Tigers were gifted plenty of opportunities early through the Raiders' ill discipline, but struggled to convert their possession into points. Luke Brooks and Api Coruscant were both outstanding and came up with some wonderful tries that kept the Tigers right in it up until the death, with even the bounce of the ball going against them. I really do feel for the Tigers, as it does seem that they get shafted most weeks, with the Raiders obviously scoring 2 of their 4 tries off the back of blatant forward passes, which ultimately proved to be the difference. The Tigers, they've also lost Dane Laurie and Charlie Staines to hamstring injuries, and both will be in doubt to make the trip across the Tasman, but Stefano Utekamanu and Stephen Bloor make their returns this week. And as for the Warriors, the Wars extended their winning streak to 4 in a row with an unconvincing 28-18 point win over a very game Gold Coast Titans side. It was a fiery contest from the opening whistle, with the Titans not allowing the Warriors to settle into their groove. When Mo Fotuaika was marched for a high shot on Chance Nickel-Klugstad, it seemed like the Warriors were going to have it all their own way for the remaining 60 minutes, but their poor discipline and handling failed them, only completing at 71%, and in stages in the second half seemed to be the more fatigued side. Sean Johnson ultimately proved to be the difference, scoring a double, setting up 2 others, and he managed the second half perfectly by kicking to the corners and making the Titans work it out from their own end. Chance Nickel-Klugstad will be sidelined this week, so Tuapiki is likely to take his place for just his 4th NRL cap. But man, he's looked rock solid and dynamic in his first 3 games. The Warriors now play 3 of their last 4 games at home in New Zealand, so big thank you to the Tigers for offering to host one of their home games in NZ, as a thank you to the sacrifices the Warriors gave up during COVID, so full credit to the West Tigers. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Warriors have won 6 of the last 7 games, that includes 5 straight. They've also won 4 of the past 5 games against the Tigers this side of the Tasman. Obviously, I am going to take the Warriors here by 1 to 12 points. I think the Warriors can get it done at home, but I also do think the Tigers are a real threat. I think they do have at least one more upset in them this season, and I really don't think the Tigers are deserving of the wooden spoon, despite some of their performances this season. So I'm going to play it safe and not write them off and take Warriors 1 to 12. And the final game on Saturday has the 12th placed Sydney Roosters taking on the 14th placed Redcliffe Dolphins at Allianz Stadium in Sydney. Starting first with the Chooks, they kept their distant finals hopes alive with a crucial 26-16 point win over the Sea Eagles on Thursday night. The Chooks started poorly and conceded what seemed like a million set restarts and penalties, which meant they found themselves defending their line for at least the first 20 minutes. To their credit though, they managed to continually repel Manly and went on to score 22 unanswered points, with Manu, Tedesco and Suali'i having big impacts on the game, until the game was completely flipped on its head when Nathan Brown was red carded in the 62nd minute. The Roosters were forced to dig deep and managed to hold off a late charge from the Sea Eagles to notch up just their 9th win of the season. Brown has been suspended for 1 game, so will not be available this week. And as for the Dolphins, they gave the Knights a run for their money, falling just short for the 2nd week in a row, 30 points to 28. The Finns went behind early but were sparked back to life when Lachlan Fitzgibbon was sin-binned, spearheaded by Jermaine Isako, who scored a hat-trick within the space of 7 minutes. The Dolphins stuck to their game plan really well and made minimal errors, but they did miss 50-plus tackles, and you can't do that against a fast and strong Newcastle side, and were burnt out wide by the likes of Gagai, Hastings and Ponga. Cody Nikorima has done a great job at fullback, but I would really love to see Hamiso move back there. He has limited impact at centre, very similar to Joey Manu for the Roosters. And honestly, the more that Hamiso can get his hands on the ball, the better for the Dolphins. Looking at the two sides head to head, who could forget that these two sides met all the way back in round 1, with the Dolphins pulling off a famous upset, 28 points to 18, to begin their time in the NRL. But I guess given how both teams' seasons have played out since, it's not really that hard to believe now. Ooh, another absolute coin flip in my opinion, but I am going to back the Roosters here 1-12. You can't really trust either side, but I'm going to take the Chooks just. I think they'll be desperate to avenge their round 1 loss, and their forward pack on paper is one of the best in the comp. They just need to string it together for more than the first 10 minutes. Alright, moving to the first of 2 Sunday games, starting first with the 4th place Melbourne Storm taking on the 5th placed Canberra Raiders at Amy Park in Melbourne. Starting first with the Storm, Melbourne would doubt another heavy loss to the Panthers for the second time in just 5 weeks, going down 26 points to 6. It was competitive early and the Storm even opened the scoring, but Melbourne were their own worst enemies from that point onwards, constantly coughing up possession and trying to take shortcuts rather than earning the right through sustained pressure. It was always going to be a tough ask without Jerome Hughes, but Melbourne gave away far too many penalties and opened the door for the Panthers. Speaking of Hughes, he is set to make his return this week, as is Xavier Coates and Remus Smith. And as for Canberra, the Raiders, they'll be counting their lucky stars after only just getting past the last placed West Tigers, 22 points to 18. The Raiders were absolutely awful in the first half and were only completing at 33% after 30 minutes. To their credit though, they came up with some really huge defensive plays, with Corey Horsburgh coming up with multiple try savers he had no business making. The Milk did score 2 tries off the back of blatant forward passes, which will no doubt be a hot topic of discussion this week, but I don't think many Canberra fans will be happy with their side's performance against the odds-on favourite for back-to-back wooden spoons. Seb Chris was unable to finish the game with a hamstring injury and will not be available this week. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Storm have won 5 of the past 7 games against the Raiders. However, the Raiders have won their last 4 games in Melbourne, and that includes last year's 28 to 20 point victory to knock Melbourne out in week 1 of the finals. Now, despite the stats and the Raiders' recent form in Melbourne, I do like the Storm here 13+. I think the Storm can put on a similar performance as they did against the Eels, with Hughes, Munster and Grant running wild. And the final game on Sunday has the 7th placed Newcastle Knights taking on the 15th placed Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs at McDonald Jones Stadium in Newcastle. Starting first with the Knights, Newcastle managed to hang on against a valiant Dolphins side, locking in their 5th straight win, 30 points to 28. Newcastle were put under pressure early when Lachlan Fitzgibbon was sent off, and the Dolphins scored 3 tries during his absence. But as they have done so often recently, Hastings was able to give Kalen Ponga unreal service, and he was able to cash in on the Dolphins' poor right edge defense. When you think about it, it was a really impressive performance considering the Dolphins had more possession, gave away far fewer penalties, and played with a one-man advantage. Newcastle have really hit their strides at the business end of the season and have their eyes firmly set on a berth in the finals. And as for Canterbury, the Dogs will be fresh off their final bye of the season, but the week prior managed to sneak past the Dolphins 23 points to 22. Canterbury welcomed back a ton of troops, including Liam Knight and Viliami Kikau, who scored their first try. Now, it was a 1-point win thanks to a first half Matt Burton field goal, but the Dogs, they should have really run away with it. They blew multiple chances and were only able to muster a 67% completion rate. It's too little too late for the Doggies, who are finally back at full strength, but will be turning their heads and thought forward to the 2024 season. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, Newcastle thumped the Dogs 66 points to 0 just 6 weeks ago, and the Knights have won 4 of the past 5, but the Dogs do have a great record in Newcastle, winning 7 of the past 8 games in the Hunter. Ooh, another good one to end the round, but you have to take the Knights here 1-12 based on recent form. The Dogs obviously looked good or better with a full strength side, but that 67% completion rate and the amount of botched tries they dished up, they're still not. It's going to take them a bit of time to get that synergy, so Knights 1-12 for me. Alright, bang, and just like that, we are done for another week. In summary, I'm taking the Panthers 13+, the Sharks 1-12, Broncos 13+, South Sydney 13+, the Warriors 1-12, Roosters 1-12, Melbourne 13+, and the Knights 1-12. Thank you as always for watching. Apologies for the delay in getting this video up, but I appreciate all the support. So let me know who you're tipping in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.